Hello and welcome to the third video in the Getting Started series for Lightning Forms. What we're going to do first of all here is just jump into Lightning Forms. Now we know from the second video how to do that. So we're going to click onto the Lightning Forms button and we're going to start off with the new form ASPX by clicking onto Customize. And as we found out in the last video, this is going to open up the form design experience where we can go through and look at every single option that we have available to us. So first of all, what we're going to do is just address the command bar at the very top here. And I mentioned this in the last video as well, that everything on this gray bar here that you see is to do with Lightning Forms. So this is part of the Lightning Forms design experience. Beneath that, you'll see another command bar that has a save and cancel button on it. That has nothing to do with Lightning Forms. That's actually the save and cancel button on your form itself. And we can add buttons to that, which you'll see in just a moment. So starting off with the command bar, some of the things that we'll explain, and we're not going to go into detail at this point, so this is very high level just to show you how to navigate the design experience of Lightning Forms. We will be going into detail in later videos. But first of all, I just want to point out there's some form settings, and under the form settings, what you're going to see in here is first of all the size of your right hand side panel. And the default is a medium side panel, and you've also got small, or you've got large, or you've got full screen. So I'm just going to pop out of the designer for a moment. In fact, I'll just open up a different tab and show you that when I hit new, this is what we're talking about, the size of this panel. And bear in mind, whilst that panel is open, I can't do really anything over on the left hand side here. This is all dead space. So over on the right hand side here, this is what I'm doing at the moment, is filling out this form. So ideally, we should make that as large as possible, make that the real focus, but obviously we don't want to have something that looks too wide for what it's going to do. So if you've got side-by-side columns, and we'll get into that in a moment as well, if you've got multiple column widths, then what you can do is go for a large form over a medium form. If you do go with full screen, you kind of lose that side panel experience. It is still going to be a responsive modern form, but it will fill the screen, much like the design is here. Yeah, that's a personal choice, obviously, and I'm going to currently stick with medium, just point out that is there. One thing to point out, once you do change that, it is cached by SharePoint, so doing a Control R for a hard refresh once you've saved and closed the design experience of your form will be required so that you see that panel size change if you have changed it. We've then got the detail pane settings, and I'm going to show you what this does as well. So I'm going to jump back into this previous tab again, and you can see here we've got a few different items. And I'm going to click onto the ellipsis for one of them, and we're going to come down here to detail. This is the detail pane, and in here you can see the people that have access to this item. We can see the properties, which are all the fields in this item, and we've potentially also got some usage information as well, so some activity as to when I created that item, when it was edited, and that type of thing. That's what these are corresponding with. So do we want to show the permissions section in that details pane? Do we want to show the properties, and do we want to show the activity? So you can decide. I've switched off the properties in this case. Oh, sorry, I could switch off the properties in this case. I can decide whether to show or hide that, and the reason for doing so might be because I'm using some hide formulas on my form to hide certain information from certain users. For example, you could use Lightning Forms to make it impossible to change whether the purchase order is approved or not. So I could do that on the form, but then somebody could literally come in here and change the value themselves from pending to approved. So they can literally type in here pending or approved and update the form that way. So if we want to stop people from being able to do that, one way is to just hide the properties, and that way they can't. Okay, so that's something that you can do under the form settings. We've then got actions. So actions include the ability to add a command bar button. So again, these are the buttons here, save and cancel. So under actions and then command bar, I can add buttons. So in here we might want to, for example, have a submit button. So I could give this a submit display name. I could choose an icon associated with that button, and we can then configure our actions. And so the actions you can see in here, this is the action builder. So the action builder has a list of different actions that we can create. We're going to be spending quite a bit of time on this in the videos, but just to give you a sort of taster for the sort of things that you might want to do here, one of them might be to just simply save the form. So we can find the save form. We could send an email, and the email may be sent from me as the current user. So this then gets into the expression builder. Again, we'll talk about this in depth, but what I'm going to do is just say that this email is being sent from me, the current user, to, and then I could put in, accounts or something like that, lightningtools.com or whatever this might be, for them to go in and approve that, and then we can build a message with a subject and a body and so on. And like I said, we'll get into that in a bit more depth. And once I've sent that email, I might decide that I want to close the form. So I can just simply double click onto close. And yeah, that's the action builder, allowing me to string all these different actions together that we want behind a command button. So once I've okayed that, we now have a submit button. So when we hit save, notice we've got save, cancel, and submit. Okay, so there's action buttons, and if you're interested in finding out what sort of action buttons you can create, there, like I say, there is a video dedicated to that using the action builder. But actions don't have to be just command bar buttons, they can be form load actions as well. So we've got some of those same actions that you can configure with the expression builder, or sorry, the action builder for pre-form loads. That's prior to the form rendering, and after form load, so after the form has rendered. So this after form load is an ideal time to set values in fields, or to set the focus to a specific tab or something along those lines. Okay, so next to actions, we also have styling. And so this is where you can do styling generally. So we can add styles to all fields, we can add styles to all tabs or to all buttons, and so on. So we can do that through here, and the plumbing is to basically go through and add a style to that you want to change. You can give the style a name, and then we can go through and set our styles as required. So in here we might, for example, want to change the border color. So I can set the border color that I want. That writes the CSS in order to be able to apply the blue border to my tabs. Okay, so I don't have any tabs, but anyway, that's where we can go and do it. And these conditions can also, sorry, these styling options can also be set conditionally as well. So you could have a style set to a field if the field is set to approved or something along those lines. So we have styling. Again, there's an entire video series on styling. We've then got simply, of course, just save my changes that I'm making, or save and close my changes, and then there's a link to the getting started help as well. So this is contextual help that you can reach out to. And then we've also got the ability to import and export the form design. We mentioned that in video 1, and I can also uncustomize the form, which is there on the far right hand side. Okay, so that's the command bar. Now, when you're inside the form itself, one of the things we can do is add sections. So you'll notice we've got this add new section option, and that has the plus symbol over on the far left. When you see the plus symbol in the middle within a section, this is about adding something into that section. So one of the benefits of adding a new section is to actually flip from having one column wide to maybe 2 column wide, which you don't have to do throughout the form, but you can mix and match it. So if sometimes you want side-by-side columns, other times you want full width columns, you can achieve that by adding a new section. So that gives me that new section there, and then I can either drag fields into those new columns within inside that section, or you can hit the plus that we just pointed out to add fields as well. So any existing fields can be added from here. So you'll notice inside this add dialog, we've got all of the fields. that exist inside the current list. We've got other controls like data connectors. This is the cross-site data lookup column. That is something that we cover as one of the last videos. We've then also got some other controls like tabs and action buttons and toolbars and rich text that you can add onto your form. And then there's the other lists and libraries as well, which we'll be getting into in the layout section. Okay, so these are things that we can add from here. So if I wanted to add, say, the vendor here, I could do it that way rather than dragging and dropping the vendor control. Okay, so that's how we can position things within inside the different sections. So moving things, as you saw, you can just drag and drop the fields around. As you hover over any control, whether it's a field or a tab or a button, you're going to see some different icons appearing on the left hand side. So there's the remove, the trash icon. We've then got move, which allows you to drag, and we've then got the double parentheses here, which is configure expressions, and then we've also got field configuration. So this is a drop down field, which is why I'm seeing the field configuration. This is where we can refine the lookup column. Again, we'll get more into that when we cover the lookups. Beneath that, we've got the expression configuration. So the expressions that you can configure include when the field is visible, when the field is enabled, what the initial value is going to be for that field. We can set calculated values for the field as well, and we can also create validation options like a validation rule and validation text, and that literally puts a blocker on being able to save the form unless the validation rule is meeting the true or false statement. Okay, so some examples of that. If, for example, I set a initial value on the purchase order number, what I can do here is go into the expression builder, and against initial, I'm in the expression builder and I can go through and type an expression. Now within here there are three different options. So we've got template, we've got assignment, and we've got function. Template is an easy way to do some assignments basically. So what I can do in here is just say something like reference a field name. So I'm going to put in ID to reference the ID value for this list item, but I'm going to prefix that with purchase order, and we could put an underscore or a space or something like that in there. So what this is doing is building a string of the word purchase order with an underscore, and then it'll be number 1, number 2, number 3, etc. for creating that purchase order number. And you can test these as well. So I can test the value against an existing item. So notice how this one is actually going to say purchase order underscore 7 as an example. So that's how we can use the template. You don't need to worry about plus operators or anything like that. Just build the string however you want. So your typical sort of first name plus last name, these fields perhaps don't exist in this form, but just to show you, rather than doing something like that where we have to literally put in the space with the plus operator either side, I don't need to do that when I'm using template. Lightning Forms will work it out. I just need to put first name space last name with the double braces, and that's going to complain because those fields don't exist in this form, but that's an example of what we can do. So maybe if we wanted to build an address, for example, we could have ship to name space ship to street space ship to zip, and then we have the address all concatenated. So that's how we can set a template. We also have assignment. So assignment, you do get the operators because now this is about building a calculation that is going to result in a value that gets returned to the field. So we're assigning that value to a field. So in order to help us, these are all the fields that are currently inside the form, and we can double click those in order to create the expression. So in here we've got things like total, for example, is going to be populated from the subtotal and the sales tax. So if I wanted to create that calculation, I would literally have sales tax plus subtotal, and that would give me my total. Okay, so we're using the plus operator, and that will return that value. And then finally, you've also got function, and function is JavaScript. So there's different places where you may want to use a function. One example is to get today's date. So you may have a little bit of JavaScript to get today's date, and there's going to be some useful functions that we can talk about as we go through. But here you're using JavaScript as opposed to our own expressions. And also to point out in here is context objects. So whilst today's date is not a context object, there are other things like the current user information. So we can get to the current user's login name, the current user's email address. We can get to the current page culture name or get a query string from the current page. We can determine the type of form that we're working with and that sort of thing, all using those context objects. Okay, so that's the expression builder, and that's what we can do to set an expression against any of these different properties for a field. So that can also be set for other things as well. So not just fields, but also you'll see those same things for sections or rows. So in here we've got a expression configuration for when the row is visible or row is enabled. So it might be, for example, that we want to hide this row based on who you are. So under the context objects, I could say if the user is a member of a group, and that group could be a Microsoft 365 or Active Directory security group, we could put in that group name. So it might be accounts payable. So if you're in the accounts payable group, you'll see this section. If you're not, then you won't. Okay, so that's an example that you could do there to hide everything inside of that section. All right, so that's the sort of general layout of the fields and getting to those properties. We're going to get into a lot more depth in terms of the layout. So we'll be introducing things like using the rich text controls that you see in here to add text onto your forms. We'll look at adding tabs onto the forms and that type of thing in the later video, and we'll focus purely on all the layout stuff, but hopefully this has given you an idea as to how to navigate the design experience when you're using Lightning Forms. Okay, many thanks.